Most people think jazz is complicated, but that isn't always true, and this solo is a masterclass in simple, swinging phrases with a lot of jazz blues. I'm not sure why Barney Kessel is often left out between Joe Pass, Pat Martino, Wes and Benson, but you want to check out this solo. It will help you learn to play more melodic, use better rhythms, and add some simple phrasing to your jazz solos. The solo is on Charlie Parker's bebop classic Yardbird Suite, so you would expect a lot of eighth note lines, but already from the first phrases, you can tell that Barney Kessel is not only leaning on bebop. Check out how he's focusing on rhythm more than notes. So he starts out incredibly simple. Essentially, this is of course just using repeated notes and C blues, so it's all kind of coming out of C minor pentatonic. But he does kind of manage to hit the changes because the B flat is coming along over the bar with F minor 7 to B flat 7. Now in bar 4, he adds the harmony back in with the A7 line. And this is something that you will see return really often in this solo. Repeated phrases, in this case, just really a single note and some rhythm that he's repeating, or that concept. But Barney Kessel only digs into the changes when he wants to, and very often things are very strong melodies that work on top of the song, but they're not really about just spelling out the harmony with arpeggios, like this. We get this really great chromatic jazz blues phrase immediately after the A7, something that to me sounds very Charlie Parker inspired. Now, the essential part of this is of course that chromatic run from the flat 3 up to the 5. And he plays this C blues phrase on top of the D minor 7 G7, so it doesn't really come from the chords, but it's more just related to C major. But keep in mind that C blues on top of C also does create some tension, so it does kind of resolve, and he's rounding it off with just going back to the C major triad first, like an enclosure, and then just up the triad before ending on the 6, the A. And that kind of gives you that sort of major blues or major pentatonic sound. He sticks to the blues and uses a repeated riff which works perfectly on top of the changes. And notice how much variation he also has in his phrasing here. And here he's changing the ending of the repeated phrase to develop it every time. So we have this as a main motif on the C major 7, then he plays a shorter version in the second bar on the F minor 7 B flat 7, and then again a longer version when it returns to C major. And what is great about this is that it becomes a longer phrase across 4 bars, which is different from a lot of bebop, which is much more about getting into the chords and spelling out the harmony, not so much about connecting phrases across several bars, even though Parker does actually do this quite a lot. It's also worth noticing that this is not just an arpeggio or a scale run, it's a much stronger melody using only a few notes. Barney Kessel uses a lot of different techniques to add phrasing to his solo, and here it's a lot of slides where he's moving from this motif into the A7 to sort of connect with the harmony again. Again, he's not going for the clear notes that really spell out the changes in this example, but notice how amazing it sounds as a way of rounding off the complete phrase of the repeated riff. Now, in the first bridge of the solo, we get to hear some solid bebop soloing, demonstrating that he's also very much at home in that vocabulary. Before we continue with the next phrase, let me just quickly break down the form and the harmony of the song Yardbird Suite, because this is a bebop tune, it's written by Charlie Parker. As far as I know, it's not on a standard. He of course did use standards as sort of the foundation in terms of chord progression for a lot of his songs, but this one I think is an original chord progression. It is an AABA form, and the first examples were on the A parts, which are in C major with a minor subdominant in the second bar and a few secondary dominants. It's nothing too complicated, as you've already seen. The bridge modulates first to E minor and then to D minor before returning to C major in the last A. Now in a later example, you'll see Barney Kessel lean into this modulation in the bridge, and turn that into a great sound. This recording is from a Hampton Halls album called 4, so it's Barney Kessel as a sideman. It has Hampton Halls on piano, Barney Kessel on guitar, Red Mitchell on bass, and Shelly Manne on drums. Hampton Halls worked with a lot of guitarists, and there are also a few really great albums with Jim Hall. I even made a video on one of Jim Hall's solos of the first of those albums. I'll link to it in the description. If you want to check out a great Jim Hall up-tempo solo, then that's the video to check out. The first bridge starts with a simple repeated phrase, similar to what we talked about earlier, but now he starts moving through the changes as well. So the first part of this is really pretty simple. So really just moving that third interval up through the scale, and in that way, of course, also following the changes. Now in bar 4, things get a bit more interesting. First, you have this melody around the A. And then I think he actually just messes up and skips that last A, so like this. From here we get a scale run with a pull-off, which is played as a triplet, down to the C sharp from F, and then he resolves to A. This is all still pretty simple, but now the bebop lines start to appear, and you will even see him use bebop lines in a motivic way as well later in the solo. Now, of course, the main difference is that it's just much more dense, and the changes are also becoming a much more important part of the solo. I'll get back to his right hand technique here, because that's something I think is pretty typical for Barney Kessel, but you also want to notice how he plays A7 and not E half diminished A7, which kind of also follows how Barry Harris approaches 2/5 progressions. Ignore the 2 and just play the 5. In this case, A7 flat 9. He follows this up with a C major 7 pivot arpeggio on D7, another bebop classic. And what is essentially also a line cliche on the D minor 7 G7 that ends the bridge. He continues by turning a bebop line into a motif, which is a good opportunity to show you a part of his technique that I find very typical for him. If you look at videos of Barney Kessel playing, then you can see that he's mostly using downstrokes. You could probably say the same thing about somebody like Herb Ellis. And this is a technique that I find very unnatural, since I'm much more relying on alternate picking. But a part of that, which Barney uses really well, is these short sweeps for playing arpeggios. Now you already heard that in the example where he's playing the D minor triad. And that technique is also what he uses for this next sort of motivic bebop phrase, where it's very practical for the arpeggios. Now this is a motif on the C major 7 using an E minor 7 arpeggio. And this is a lot easier to play, where you have this all downstrokes to play the E minor 7 arpeggio sliding into the E, and he then develops this and plays a similar melody using an A flat major 7 arpeggio over the F minor 7 chord. So again, also the arpeggio from the third. And especially the E minor 7 arpeggio makes a lot more sense when you play it with all downstrokes. Now the way Barney Kessel keeps tying phrases together and creating these longer stories in his solos it's pretty much only Wes who manages to do that as well. What do you think? After all this bebop, then it's also great to just change things up and go back to some very simple but swinging riffs. And also, you need to hear how he simplifies the bridge, but then also adds a different sound to it. This example only uses 2 notes, and it is repeating or riff based. Now, I first thought I wanted to describe this as blues, but to be honest, I think it's rhythmically a bit too complicated to be blues, and swing is maybe a better description. But of course, you can let me know what you think in the comments. So again, it's really simple. So really just G and C, and he's not following the changes, he's just floating on top. And of course, it fits all the chords as well, so it all comes together in this great energetic phrase ending on an A. So after having played the, he goes down to A and then adds this quarter tone bend, which is also something that Barney Kessel actually uses quite often. Until now, you've heard him play blues and simple phrases over the harmony, and also really digging into the chords with bebop. But he actually has another approach to soloing over this song as well. The way Barney Kessel is using melodic minor in the bridge here in the second chorus is really amazing. In a way, he's reducing the harmony down to just an E minor 6 tonic chord, but at the same time, when he does this, he's really adding a lot of color to the whole thing. And again, he's also just tying the whole phrase together in a longer 4-bar period, just like Wes. And I know I'm saying it every time, but that's because it's really not something that is that common in jazz solos. So the bridge, of course, modulates to E minor, and in this chorus, Barney Kessel really sort of emphasizes the major 6, so that C sharp, to get that melodic minor sound out. And all of this is really just an E minor 6 arpeggio, but then we have this sort of chord response between the low octave, so, and the high octave. And that's a really great effect, and again, a very powerful way to sort of change the sound from chorus to chorus, which is something that you definitely also want to try to get into your playing. Another guitarist who is also criminally underrated and utterly mind-blowing is Ed Bickert. His playing is amazing and also very melodic, plus that he has some really unusual voicings and tricks with the harmony that he's using in this solo. Check out this video to learn about that and hear a Telecaster being used for jazz, because, well, the guitar doesn't really matter. Learn jazz, make music.